Hey everyone, it's Ben from BA's Drum Academy here. Today I am tuning my snare drum. Now this is something you want to get right because the snare is the heartbeat of the entire drum kit. If you can't get the kick and the snare to sound right, you don't really have a good sounding kit. So today I'm going to go through with you how I tune my snare drum. Now before I get started, I just have to say that there is probably a lot of people out there who are going to be watching this and other drummers who are going to say, oh man, Ben, you shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? This is how I tune my snare to make it sound the way that I like my snare to sound. I've spent a lot of time combing through lots of research, lots of other people's videos, and also talking to other musicians and just kind of talk to them about how did you get that sweet snare sound? I mean, the snare drum itself does make a big difference of what style it is, whether it's a steel drum or has wood in it. But honestly, tuning is the key thing that makes any snare sound really, really good. If you can't figure out how to do tuning, you need to learn. It's a very fundamental skill. So I'm going to show you how I do mine. This snare drum here is very worn down. I've actually already loosened up all the lugs, but you can see how it's already just naturally sitting. It's already stretched. It has quite a lot of a dark spot here in the middle, and you can see that's where I've been hitting the drum a lot. But this snare drum has actually been really hard to tune lately, and I've had this drum head on for probably about 3 months, and I've been playing this snare drum a lot. It's the part of the kit that gets hit the most, and it's overstretched, and it's time for a new one. Snare heads are generally a bit thicker, so they last a bit longer, but I know that this snare head is time for a replacement. So I'm gonna replace it today. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm gonna do is go to a place that's nice and quiet and that you can hear the drum effectively. Don't have any background noise. Don't put it in while your guitars are doing sound check or anything like that. Try and find a nice quiet place. And you're also gonna need a drum key. Now I have a couple drum keys to make things go a little faster. So if you have 2, awesome. If you don't, that's fine. And of course, if you need a new drum head, you of course have your new drum head. If you're not replacing a drum head, this is still going to be very helpful for you. As I always suggest when you're retuning drums and to try and get a most even sound, I always like to start fresh, meaning that I will loosen up all the lugs here completely all the way off, and I will reposition the snare head. Something that I like to do is if I'm repositioning the snare head, I like to give it a turn like about 90 degrees or 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and then I'll put it back on. But I know that this time it's good time for repair. So I'm gonna take the new head off and replace it with the new one. So let's get started. So the first thing I did was, before the video, I already loosened up all of these lugs. So this is called a lug. And then the top head here is called a batter head, which is a term you'll need to know. And the resonant head is the bottom. Now we'll get to the resonant head a little bit later, but when I'm tuning my snare drum today, because my resonant head generally isn't going to be replaced, it gets replaced maybe once a year. So it's not going to get replaced today, but I'm going to replace this one. So I'm going to check it a little later on, and we'll talk about the relationship between those two. So I'll remove the hoop, and let's remove the head here, and now we can dispose of it. Now you have a fancy Frisbee. And you can dispose of that however you wish. Now, as I have the head off here, it's a good time for us to just double check. So I like to always dust in here. For some reason, all these little small pieces of sawdust like to get inside the drum and dust and so on. And now I also have a full view of the drum itself, so I can quickly check and make sure that all of these little nuts and bolts here are nice and tight, and everything is nice and clean. Nothing's going to be in there that's going to rattle. Perfect. Now, I wouldn't suggest putting anything inside the drum. I've seen some people like have a really loud volume problems because they live in a house and they put stuff in it to dampen it, like towels or underlay of carpet was the one thing I've seen. Don't do that. You're gonna kill the life of the drum. It's designed to be this way, designed to resonate. There's different dampening techniques which we'll talk about soon. So now I've checked it and I've put everything, I've cleaned it all. Let's put the new drum head on. So here's my new drum head, nice and fresh and clean. And I always like to just put the logo at the top because I don't know why, it just always seems and looks very, very good to me. So then after that, I'll put on the hoop back onto the drum. Now, this hoop this drum has 10 lugs. 10 lugs, 10 bolts that we will have to tighten and put in here. Now, this is probably going to be the longest part of the video, so I'm going to fast forward here as I put all these lugs in, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use my fingers to tighten these up. And before I do that, of course, I'll pause it. So right now, I'm just going to place all these in and give them a little tightening with my fingers to a point before we start. Okay, so I've put the drum head on. I've just saved a little bit of time in the video, at least, by just tightening up with the fingers. Now I'm gonna get to actually tuning the drum. So here's our first thing that we do after we put the head on, is we're gonna do something called finger tightening. So we're gonna use our fingers and we are gonna tighten the drum lugs with our fingers. We're not gonna be using one of these drum keys yet. We're not there yet. We will get there very soon. Our job is to make sure that we give this drum head the most even tuning as we can. Now, some people out there in the internet and other places swear by tuning their drums by something called seating the drum, which is where they press the drum head in and give it a stretch before they start and make sure it's an even seal. I recommend not doing that because it's a bit more risk into damaging the drum head before we even get started. I want to make sure that you don't damage the drum head before I even get to play with it. So drum heads are naturally going to stretch. They're made of some plastic. They're going to stretch over time. And especially when you put a brand new one in, it's going to stretch quite a few times. So I'm going to probably be retuning this thing after I play today. I'm going to be probably retuning it tomorrow after it sits there for a bit. Now, to help me tune today, I got myself an E-ring, which is one of these plastic things here. And this is just my little roadmap. And I put this here just for us to look at. So you can see I put some numbers on here, and these numbers refer to the order at which I tighten my drum. I'm not going to tighten each lug in a circle because I don't want this side to get tight and this side to get overstretched. I want to have an even stretch throughout everything. So I always tighten in opposites. Okay, so you'll see I start with 1, 2, 3's over here, 4, and so on. Now, I'm going to use 2 fingers at a time, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my finger strength as best as I can, and I'm going to tighten as much as I can. Number 1 and number 2. With my fingers as much as I possibly can, and that's about all I can do. Now I'll move to number 3 and 4. Number 3 seems pretty close, tight already. There we go. And now I'm going to go number 5 and 6. There we go. Now this one needs a little bit more. That's it. Grip really tight. Good. Okay, 7 and 8. Good. 9 and 10. You might notice as well, if you get a close look at it, you have these little white washers on mine. Mine are the color white. The drum is black, but the color white is with these little plastic washers are really important for these drums. It makes sure the bolts hold in place and it keeps an even tuning. So you don't want metal on metal. They are very cheap to find at any music store. Okay, so I've tightened all the fingers, all 10 lugs. Now I'm gonna start all over again because now, as you can see, number 2 moves again because I'm tightening and stretching the drum. Number 1 said no, but number 2 said yes. Here we are. Let's do 3 and 4. Okay, 5 and 6. Good, 7 and 8. 9 and 10. Good, and I'm gonna check it all one more time. Yeah, you got it. 9, 10, okay. My fingers can't take anymore, and it looks like I've got no more turns on my fingers, so I declare I've done step number 1. I finger tightened everything. Drum's not tuned. If I hit the drum, it's not gonna be, it's a pretty weak sounding snare. It's dead. And I have the snare wires off, so if I had them on, it sounds terrible. So we're not ready yet. So what we're gonna do now is it's time for the drum key. Now for the drum key, I am going to first off, I want to make an even tuning. So because snares are generally need to be pretty tight, the head itself is quite thick and strong. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna turn each of these lugs one whole turn around to make sure we get an even stretch. And I'm gonna do for each one of these in the correct pattern. I'm not gonna go in a circle, I'm gonna go an even pattern. Okay, so here we go. So I'm gonna turn this one whole turn. That's it, 360 degrees. Let's go the other one. One whole turn. Number 3, here we go, one whole turn. One whole turn here. Now make sure you don't get confused, don't get lost, because you don't wanna over tighten the drum. So take your time, have a reference guide if you need. Make sure you're tuning in a correct pattern. Common mistake people make. Okay, now I'm going to tune this one. There he is. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2. That's how I'm thinking. I'm thinking in 2 halves. 1 and 2. Okay, so now I've turned everything one whole turn, and now what I'll do is I'll get my drumstick, and we're just gonna see what it sounds like. We wanna just check to see what pitch the drum is at. I'm not fine-tuning things yet, but what we're trying to do is trying to get the drum head to get to a sound that we want. We probably have an idea of what our snare drum sounds like. Lots of people tune their snares low, high, medium, whatever, but have a kind of an idea of what your snare drum wants to sound like. Maybe you have a favorite song and you're like, I love the way that snare drum sounds in that song. Maybe this is what you're gonna be matching it to. So let's see what it sounds like. So that's pretty high already. It's pretty tight. And that's gonna stretch over time. As more I play it, the more it's going to stretch. Probably in about half an hour from now, or 30 minutes, I'm gonna need to retune this thing. Let's turn the snare on and see what it sounds like. So it sounds pretty good. It sounds pretty high, and it didn't take too much in this one. Now, if you did the whole turn and you're like, it's still not quite where I want it to be. It's either too high or too low, and it's not where the correct pitch. What you'll do is you'll take your drum key again, and now you're gonna do small turns. You're gonna do small quarter turns or even an 1/8 turn. If you're thinking like a clock, maybe you would turn it from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock kind of turn. And you would go in that pattern, use my reference guide here. There it is, put it the right way. My reference guide here, I would do small turns, either up or down, but I'm making sure that it's on all the lugs, not just certain ones, all the lugs. Okay, we're just getting to the fundamental pitch that we want. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this. And that's never really happened in the history of me tuning. So I'm pretty okay with just how it turned out there. But remember, if you're not happy with how it sounds in your drum, make small turns on that same map pattern you had before. Okay, now, step number 3. First step was finger tightening. Second step was full turn and then just getting to the correct pitch with small turns after that. Third step is now we're checking each lug to make sure that they're all even. So I have the snares off, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of go in my order, and I'm gonna just see on opposite sides if number 1 matches number 2, or if number 3 matches number 4, and so on. And what I'm looking for and what I'm hoping for is that every single one of these lugs sounds exactly the same. That's what I'm hoping for. So let's give it a try and see what it sounds like. Okay, so on my first past, I've noticed that there was a couple that were a little high and a couple that were a little low, and just a little bit of differences between some of them. So I'm gonna go back and just check it again, and I'm gonna try and correct some of those. So if I notice one that's a little too low, I'm gonna take my drum key and I'm gonna place it at that correct spot, and I'm gonna give it a slight turn higher. Okay, so remember, my goal is to try and match all of them. So let's pretend I'm gonna try and match the sound of number 1 and number 2. Okay, so that's my key sound I'm gonna try and match. So let's go to 3 and 4 and see if that matches. Here's 3 and 4. It's barely noticeable, but I think 3 and 4 are just a hair below. So I'm going to tune them up slightly. Bit more. And the smaller the drum, the more sensitive it is. So I don't turn huge turns, just little ones. And 4 needs a little more love. Okay, so I'm good there. Let's try another one. Let's try 5, 6. Actually, 5 and 6 sound pretty good. So far I've matched 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Now I've matched 5 and 6, which I didn't have to do anything for them. That naturally worked out. So let's try 7 and 8 and see if those match. So I'll hit the first ones first and see what I need to match to. Okay, so my ears is telling me it's probably really hard to notice it on camera, but as you get more practice at it, you get really good at hearing the differences. But I'm sensing number 7 and 8 are slightly high, so I'm going to lower that. Okay, sounds good. Now let's move on to the final ones, 9 and 10. And I can already tell just a pretty big difference there. It's in return to the ear is 9 and 10 are too low, but I'll try that again. Yeah, so 9 and 10 are a little low. And generally speaking, when I adjust one, it's also going to adjust its neighbors here too. So 3 and 5 are probably going to go a little bit higher after I change number 10 here. So let's make a small adjustment and see what happens. Okay, so 1 and 2 are high. So it looks like these 3 are all good, but 9 and 10 are still a little low. And I'm just toying with it. Now I've got it all matching. So all the lugs now to my ear sound identical, which is great. Now, let's turn on the snare and see what it sounds like. So I think my snare drum sounds really, really good. Now, so in the steps I've done the finger tightening. I've done to bring the drum head to pitch by doing a full turns at the start and making sure even tuning. Then the third thing I just did was making sure all the individual lugs are the same tone. And now I'm on to my last step, which is checking the difference between the top and the bottom. Now, let's talk about the resonant head of this drum head in relation to it. When you hit the top snare, it pushes some air down and makes the bottom head vibrate. And let's turn over the drum and have a look at the other side here. Now, this is the bottom of my snare drum here. A little dusty. Looks like I have some drum pieces that fell down. There we go. See, always keep a duster around. But these wires here, when this bottom part vibrates, it makes these wires vibrate. So the looser that the bottom head is, the more that the snares will vibrate. And of course, all snares have a little dial that you can adjust the tightness of these snare wires. Now, if you are replacing this bottom head, and you don't do it very often because you barely hit it. If you're replacing it, here's a quick little tip. When you have to take everything off and you're putting it on to tune it, it's kind of annoying because you can't hear things from this. You can actually take a drumstick, and if you have enough little leeway, you can actually lift it underneath it. And now you actually just prop it up on each of the rim, and now you are able to hear the heads easily. Now, the process for tuning this thing is exactly the same as the other side. However, remember this side is very, very thin. A snare drum resonant head is very, very thin. So over-tuning it, over-tightening it is a dangerous game. It can break. So I recommend that you're just going tight to finger touch. So you want a little bit of give, not a lot. Some people like it a little looser, but honestly, it's personal preference. You've got to like the sound. As long as all the lugs have tension on them and there's an even tuning. So I like to quickly just check all the lugs, make sure it's right. I don't spend a lot of time going really into like what it sounds like in each lug because it's variable. The batter head, the side that you hit, is gonna be where all the tuning comes in. So when you're playing the snare drum, it's not actually adjusted and you wanna change the sound of it. You shouldn't really need to change the resonant head that much. The only side that that really will make a big difference in how the snare drum sounds is the batter head, okay, is the side you hit. So if you want a lower, beefier sound, then you can actually just lower the tuning of the batter head, okay? That's all you gotta do. You don't have to touch the resonant head. You just lower the top head. If you want a really tight, snappy, cracky sound, then you wanna tighten the top head. So that's a kind of some few things that you think about. Now, if you have a snare drum that keeps buzzing on you and it keeps ringing and it has an overtone, or it's too bright and too, like, it really bleeds and hurts your ears, I recommend that you can get some dampening products. So for example, this E-ring here that we had before can actually make a big difference with how the drum sounds. So for example, I'll play the snare drum without the ring. And now I'll play with the ring. So you might, the sound that you're probably listening for is the ringing it just gets choked, it just dies. So that's something, it really takes away a lot of the high frequency noises. Other options that people like to use as well is something called moon gels. Moon gels are just these sticky little things here, like, so here's some clear ones, they come in blue as well, and they just kind of stick on the hoop of the drums, so it can actually take away, it does the same thing as an E-ring does. So you notice how like muffled and choked that sounds. So maybe if it's too much, you take one away. So there you go. So you can kind of put as many on as you think you need. You just don't put them in the middle of the drum. And the last thing that some people do as well is I've noticed that some people put things on top of the snare itself, like they've put a t-shirt over the towel or a tea towel, and it really takes away a lot of the volume of the drum. As well, some people even cut out the old snare heads and they just put them on top. I've seen people put wallets on top, and you might actually see as well people put like weights or things on top of it so that it actually chokes the drum and makes it sound a little less volumey. Because snares are meant to sound very loud and very bright and very cracky. So in order to eliminate those sounds, if they're not wanted in your sound, then you've got to put some adjustments on it. So other than that, that is how I tune my snare drum. I hope that there's been something here that's been very valuable for you. If for whatever reason, the last thing I'll say, if for whatever reason that anything that you're trying here doesn't work for your tuning your snare drum, and you can't get it right, you've just tried everything and it doesn't work, what could you do? Well, one thing that you could do is you could actually take the snare drum itself to a music store and have someone else tune your drum. Have a professional try and tune your drum for you. And you could talk to them and learn from them and see how they do it. Every drummer honestly tunes their drums a little bit differently with sound, but the generic thing is the same, where you're always tuning evenly on the snare, on the heads, and giving even tension throughout everything. If for whatever reason it still doesn't work, one thing you could also try is, not other than replacing the head, but you could also just turn the head like from a 12 o'clock position, if you look at the logo, to a 3 o'clock position. I call that the 12 to 3 technique. And so you're taking the drum head and just turning it sideways by like 90 degrees and then retuning it that way. And if that still doesn't really help, then it could be a bit more of a serious problem. You could make sure that the lugs have the lugs themselves are not broken, or the little plastic washers for detention washers are not broken. Maybe if you're gigging a lot and you don't protect your snare drum, you don't have a case or something, and you're just throwing it in the back and it's being handled pretty harshly, that can also affect even how the drum is warped. So I would recommend, if that's a case and you want to get it explored a little bit more for repair, take it to your local music shop and ask for further advice. They're there to help you, and they will teach you probably a lot of things about that as well. So just some things to think about as you move forward. Anyways, I hope that this video has been helpful for you, and if you have any more questions or you want to learn more about drums and check out my free resources and lessons, check out bhdrumacademy.com. Talk to you soon.